And they told stories about how they told someone and tried to get help. They told the FBI and they weren't listened to. And they told law enforcement and no one did anything. And these women don't just number a few. These women number around 1,000 women. And they are victims of something that's unthinkable. And this should have never, ever happened. This was the biggest fight I think I've seen in Washington, D.C.
So Mike Johnson just got absolutely steamrolled on the Epstein Files, and honestly, watching him try to save face while his entire strategy collapses has been something to see. Picture this. It's November 18th, 2025. The House of Representatives is about to vote on the Epstein Files Transparency Act. This is the bill that would force the government to release all documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. Every name, every connection, every piece of evidence, and Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, has spent months trying to prevent this vote from happening. He's used every trick in the book, kept the chamber closed for weeks, refused to swear in a newly elected Democrat because her vote would trigger a discharge petition, coordinated with the White House to pressure members, done everything possible to kill this bill without his fingerprints being too obvious. Come on. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Our regular legislative session. We have a lot of work to do. My colleagues on this side of the chamber are ready and eager to get back to our urgent legislative work that we promised the American people we would do. We've got to continue lowering the cost of health care. We've got to bring down prices for American families, and we've got to finish the regular appropriations process, just to name a few of those priorities. And I wish I could say that our first order of business would be to get to those urgent priorities, but of course we're here spending time on the floor about something else. This is something we could have resolved last week when we brought a unanimous consent to pass.
But the pressure became overwhelming. Survivors of Epstein's abuse organized and demanded action. They met with Johnson. They told him their stories. They said they were exhausted from surviving the trauma and then surviving the politics that swirl around it. That's a direct quote. These women survived Jeffrey Epstein, and now they're having to survive politicians like Mike Johnson, who are more interested in protecting powerful people than delivering justice. Can you believe this? And it wasn't just survivors. Regular people were furious, both left and right. Progressives wanted accountability for Epstein's elite network. MAGA populists wanted to expose the deep state pedophiles they've been talking about for years. Nobody was on Johnson's side. He was fighting against basically everyone except a small group of powerful people who desperately want those files to stay sealed. So eventually Johnson had no choice. He let the vote happen. And the House passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act 427 to 1. 427 to 1. Think about that number. In the most divided, partisan, dysfunctional Congress in modern history, Republicans and Democrats came together and voted almost unanimously to release the Epstein Files. The only thing that could unite this Congress was transparency about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and the powerful people who enabled them. That tells you everything about how explosive these files are and how desperate the public is to see them. Are you kidding me? But even after the vote, Johnson couldn't help himself. He had to justify his months of obstruction, so he held a press conference and called the bill a raw and obvious political exercise. Raw and obvious political exercise. That's what he called legislation that passed his chamber 427 to 1. He warned that releasing the files could create new victims by disclosing sensitive investigative material. He listed all these supposed serious deficiencies in the bill, and he demanded that the Senate fix the problems before passing it. This is after he voted yes himself, by the way. He voted for the bill and then immediately went out and trashed it and begged the Senate not to pass it as written. The cognitive dissonance is stunning. Johnson spent months blocking the vote. Then when he couldn't block it anymore, he voted yes while simultaneously calling it flawed and dangerous. He's trying to have it both ways, trying to look like he supports transparency while also undermining the bill and giving cover to people who want to keep the files sealed. It's the most transparent political calculation you'll ever see, and it's pathetic. Come on. And then the Senate responded, and their response was basically the same as before. No thanks, Mike. We're passing the House bill as is. Senate leaders said they would move the legislation by unanimous consent with no changes. They completely rejected Johnson's demands to fix the supposed deficiencies. They're sending the bill straight to Trump's desk in the exact form the House passed it. The Senate doesn't care about Johnson's concerns. They don't think the bill needs fixing. They're done with his obstruction, and they're moving forward with or without his blessing. So now Johnson's stuck. He fought for months to stop this and lost. He tried to get the Senate to water it down, and they refused. Trump is going to sign the bill because he's publicly said he supports releasing the files, and within 30 days of Trump's signature, the Justice Department has to start releasing documents. The Epstein files are coming. All the names, all the connections, everything Johnson tried to protect is about to become public, and Johnson ends up looking like the guy who tried to cover it all up. The Capitol absolutely erupted over this, not just the vote itself, but the whole fight leading up to it. Members of Congress furious at Johnson for blocking the vote, survivors staging protests and press conferences, media covering every twist and turn, the discharge petition drama, with Johnson refusing to seat Adelita Grijava specifically to prevent her from being the 218th signature. It was chaos, high-stakes political theater over one of the most explosive scandals in American history, and Johnson was at the center of it, fighting on the wrong side, losing every battle. And here's what makes this even more damaging. Johnson is supposed to be a MAGA speaker. He's supposed to be aligned with the populist base that hates elite corruption and wants accountability. But on the Epstein Files, Johnson was fighting to protect the elite, to keep their secrets buried, to prevent transparency. That's the opposite of what his base wants. MAGA voters have been screaming about Epstein and elite pedophile rings for years. They want those files released more than almost anyone, and their speaker was the main obstacle. Can you believe this? So Johnson got pushed to the brink, not just politically, but in terms of his credibility with his own base. He had to choose between continuing to obstruct, which would have destroyed him with MAGA populists, or letting the vote happen and losing the protection fight for the powerful people who wanted the files buried. Either way, he loses. He chose to let the vote happen and try to spin it afterward. But the spin isn't working. Everyone sees what he was doing. Everyone knows he tried to stop this. And his legacy is now tied to being the speaker who fought against Epstein transparency and failed. Okay, so let's dig into the impossible position Johnson put himself in and why this became such a disaster for his speakership. First, you need to understand the political dynamics around the Epstein files. This isn't a normal left versus right issue. This is something that crosses party lines in weird ways. On the left, you have progressives who want accountability for wealthy, powerful men who abuse women. They see Epstein as a symbol of how the rich and connected get away with horrific crimes. They want the files released to expose everyone involved and ensure justice for survivors. On the right, you have MAGA populists who believe in deep state conspiracies. They think Epstein was connected to a network of elite pedophiles in government, entertainment, and business. They want the files released to prove their theories and take down the corrupt establishment. So both sides want transparency, just for slightly different reasons, and that creates overwhelming political pressure. When left and right agree on something, it's very hard for politicians to resist. Come on, Johnson tried anyway. And the question is, why? Why would the Speaker of the House fight so hard against legislation that clearly has massive public support from across the political spectrum? The only explanation that makes sense is that he was protecting someone or multiple someones. People named in the Epstein files who have power and influence over Johnson or Trump or the Republican leadership, people who called in favors, people who applied pressure, people who made clear they did not want those files released. And Johnson tried to oblige. He started with procedural obstruction, keeping the chamber closed, preventing bills from coming to the floor. The excuse was other legislative priorities or scheduling or whatever. But the real reason was avoiding a vote on Epstein transparency, because Johnson knew if the bill came to the floor, it would pass overwhelmingly. His only hope was preventing the vote entirely. Are you kidding me? But members started organizing around a discharge petition. That's the mechanism where 218 members can force a vote, even if leadership doesn't want one. It's rarely used because it requires members to directly defy their speaker, but on the Epstein files, members from both parties were willing to do it. They started collecting signatures, and the number climbed toward 218. Johnson watched this happening and panicked because once the petition hit 218, the vote would be forced and he'd lose control entirely. That's when Johnson made his most controversial move. Adelita Grijava had won a special election to represent Arizona's 7th district. She was ready to be sworn in and take her seat, but Johnson refused to swear her in for weeks. The timeline is murky, but reporting suggests Johnson deliberately delayed Grijava's swearing in because once she took office, she could sign the discharge petition and push it over 218 signatures. So Johnson essentially disenfranchised Arizona's 7th district to prevent a vote on the Epstein files. Can you believe this? That's not a minor procedural move. That's the Speaker of the House refusing to seat a duly elected member of Congress to block a vote he doesn't like. That's an abuse of power. That's prioritizing political calculations over democratic representation, and it sparked outrage. Grijava's constituents were furious that they weren't being represented. Democrats demanded Johnson seat her immediately. Legal scholars questioned whether he had authority to delay indefinitely. The pressure built until Johnson finally had no choice. He swore Grijalva in, and she immediately signed the discharge petition. It hit 218. The vote was forced, and then the House voted 427 to 1 to pass the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Only one representative voted no, some guy from Texas named Troy Nehls. Everyone else, Republicans and Democrats, progressives and MAGA hardliners, voted yes. That includes Johnson himself. He voted for the bill, even though he spent months trying to prevent the vote, because at that point, voting no would have been political suicide. How do you vote against Epstein transparency when 426 of your colleagues vote for it? You can't. So Johnson voted yes, while privately seething that his obstruction had failed. But Johnson couldn't just take the loss gracefully. He had to try to undermine the bill, even after voting for it. So he held a press conference and laid out his concerns. He called it a raw and obvious political exercise. He warned about creating new victims. He listed supposed deficiencies. Let's talk about those concerns, because they reveal a lot about Johnson's actual motivations. Come on. Johnson's main argument was victim protection. He said releasing all the Epstein files could harm survivors by exposing sensitive details about their abuse. That sounds caring on the surface. We should protect victims. But here's the problem. Survivors of Epstein's abuse are the ones demanding transparency. They're the ones pushing for the files to be released. They met with Johnson earlier in the year and told him they wanted full disclosure. So who is Johnson protecting when he claims victim privacy concerns? One survivor who spoke publicly said she and others were exhausted from surviving the trauma and then surviving the politics that swirl around it. That's a devastating quote. These women survived Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. They survived the trauma of testifying and reliving their experiences. And now they have to survive politicians like Mike Johnson, who use victim protection as an excuse to keep information hidden. Because the victims don't want information hidden, they want accountability. They want the world to know what happened and who was involved. Johnson's victim protection argument isn't for the victims, it's for the perpetrators and enablers who don't want to be named. Johnson also warned about compromising ongoing investigations and exposing confidential informants. Again, sounds reasonable on the surface. You don't want to blow active cases or put witnesses at risk, but the bill has safeguards for that. There are processes to redact information that would genuinely compromise investigations or endanger people. The bill isn't a reckless document dump with no protections. It's a transparency mandate with reasonable exceptions for legitimate concerns. Are you kidding me? So when Johnson says the bill has serious deficiencies, what he really means is the protections aren't broad enough. He wants more redactions, more exceptions, more room to keep information hidden. And the question is, hidden for whose benefit? Not for victims who want transparency, not for the public who deserves to know, for powerful people who were involved with Epstein and don't want their names released. That's who benefits from Johnson's concerns, and that's who he was really fighting for all along. The Senate saw through it. John Thune and other Republican leaders said they weren't making any changes to the bill. They would pass the House version as is and send it to Trump. That's Senate Republicans telling their own party speaker that his concerns aren't legitimate, that the bill is fine as written, that transparency is more important than whatever objections Johnson is raising. For a speaker to publicly demand changes and have the Senate flatly refuse is humiliating. It shows Johnson doesn't have the respect or authority to dictate terms even within his own party. And it exposed the divide within the Republican Party over how to handle this. You have MAGA populists who genuinely want the Epstein files released because they believe it will expose elite corruption. They think Trump is fighting the deep state and Epstein was part of that network. Releasing the files fits their narrative. But then you have establishment Republicans and people connected to Trump's orbit who don't want the files released because they're worried about who might be named. Maybe Trump himself, maybe donors, maybe allies. There's tension between the populist demand for transparency and the elite desire for secrecy. Come on. Johnson was caught in the middle of that tension. He tried to satisfy both sides and ended up satisfying neither. MAGA populists are furious he tried to block transparency. Establishment types are angry. He eventually let the vote happen. And now the files are getting released anyway, so all his obstruction accomplished nothing except making him look bad. That's failed leadership. That's misreading your caucus and your political moment so badly that you end up in the worst possible position. Let's talk about Trump's role in all this. Because reporting suggests Johnson coordinated with the White House on trying to stop the Epstein vote. They worked together to pressure House members to not sign the discharge petition. Trump's team made calls, applied leverage, tried to keep the petition under 218 signatures, but it didn't work. Members signed anyway. And now Trump is in an awkward spot. Can you believe this? Because Trump has publicly said he supports releasing the Epstein files. He's claimed he has nothing to hide. He's positioned himself as the guy who's going to expose all the corruption. But behind the scenes, his team was helping Johnson try to block the vote. So which is it? Does Trump want transparency or doesn't he? The disconnect suggests Trump's public statements don't match his private actions, that he talks about transparency while working to prevent it. And that's going to be a problem when the files are actually released and people can judge whether Trump was truthful about his own Epstein connections. All right, let's break down what happens next and what this means for Johnson's speakership and the Epstein files. Point 1. Trump is going to sign this bill. He basically has to at this point. It passed the House 427-1, and the Senate is moving it by unanimous consent. If Trump vetoed legislation with that level of bipartisan support, the political blowback would be massive. His base would turn on him. MAGA populists would say he's protecting the elite instead of exposing them, so Trump will sign it. And within 30 days of his signature, the Justice Department has to start releasing documents. Come on. That 30-day deadline is important. It means we're going to see files relatively soon, not years from now, not after some drawn-out review process, within a month of Trump signing, and DOJ doesn't have a lot of discretion on what to release. The bill mandates full transparency, with only narrow exceptions for ongoing investigations and legitimate privacy concerns. So we're going to get names, we're going to get flight logs, we're going to get communications, we're going to get testimony. All the stuff that's been sealed and hidden for years is about to become public. And some powerful people are going to have a very bad time. We don't know exactly who yet, but based on what's already public about Epstein's network, there are politicians, business leaders, celebrities, academics, and others who had connections to him. Some of those connections might be innocent, but others are going to be damaging. And once the files are public, those people are going to have to answer questions. Media will investigate, prosecutors might open new cases, civil suits could be filed, the consequences could be career-ending for some people. Are you kidding me? Point 2. Johnson's speakership is seriously damaged. He fought on the wrong side of the most high-profile transparency fight in years and lost at every step. He used extreme tactics like refusing to seat a member of Congress. He coordinated with the White House to pressure his own caucus. He called a bill that passed 427-1 a raw political exercise, and he got overruled by the Senate when he tried to water it down. That's not a record of effective leadership. That's a record of misjudging your conference and losing control of the agenda. And it's going to affect Johnson's ability to lead going forward, because members saw that Johnson was willing to disenfranchise a district and violate democratic norms to protect powerful people connected to a sex trafficker. That's going to stick with them. Some members are going to trust Johnson less. Some are going to be more willing to defy him in future fights. His authority took a hit, and in the speaker role, once you start losing authority, it's very hard to get it back. Members smell weakness, and they exploit it. Johnson also alienated both wings of his party. MAGA populists are furious. He tried to block Epstein transparency. Establishment Republicans are angry. He eventually caved and let the vote happen. He's in the worst possible position, hated by both factions for opposite reasons. That makes it very hard to govern. How do you build coalitions and pass legislation when significant chunks of your conference don't trust you or respect your leadership? Johnson's going to struggle with that going forward. Point 3. This fight revealed the limits of coordination between Johnson and Trump. They worked together to try to stop the Epstein vote and failed. That shows their control over the Republican caucus isn't absolute, that members will defy them when the political pressure is strong enough. And that's an important lesson for future battles. When Trump and Johnson are pushing for something unpopular, they can be beaten. Members can organize discharge petitions. They can force votes leadership doesn't want. They can pass legislation the White House opposes. The Epstein bill proved it's possible. Come on. And that emboldens members in other fights. If you can defy leadership on Epstein and win, maybe you can defy them on budget issues or immigration or whatever else. The precedent matters. It shows that Trump and Johnson aren't invincible, that there are issues where public pressure and member conviction can overcome leadership opposition. That's going to make it harder for them to govern going forward. They'll face more internal resistance, more discharge petition threats, more votes they can't control. Point 4. The victim versus elite dynamic is crucial, because Johnson framed his opposition as protecting victims when victims were actually demanding transparency. That's manipulative. That's using vulnerable people as shields to protect powerful people, and survivors called him out on it. They said publicly that they were exhausted from the politics, that they wanted the files released, that Johnson's delays and obstruction were causing them more harm than transparency would. That's a powerful message. When victims of abuse are telling you that you're making things worse by blocking transparency, you should listen. But Johnson didn't. He kept pushing his victim protection argument even after survivors told him it was wrong. That shows he wasn't actually concerned about victims. He was concerned about the powerful people who would be named in the files. The victim protection framing was always cynical cover for elite protection, and everyone saw through it. Are you kidding me? This matters because we're going to see similar arguments in other contexts. Anytime there's pressure for transparency around elite misconduct, people trying to block it will claim they're protecting victims or privacy or national security. And sometimes those concerns are legitimate, but often they're just excuses to keep embarrassing information hidden. The Epstein fight showed how to tell the difference. Listen to what actual victims want. If they're demanding transparency and politicians are blocking it while claiming to protect victims, the politicians are lying. The Epstein survivors showed us that clearly. Point 5. The 427-1 vote is historically significant. That might be one of the most lopsided votes in modern congressional history on a controversial issue. Usually when something is controversial, you get division, you get party line votes or close margins. But on Epstein transparency, you got near unanimity. That tells you this transcended normal political divisions, that Republicans and Democrats, progressives and conservatives all agreed that the files need to be released and the public deserves to know the truth. And that's powerful because it shows there are still some issues where Congress can come together, where partisan differences don't matter because the moral imperative is so clear. Jeffrey Epstein ran a sex trafficking operation that abused young girls and involved powerful people. Releasing the files so we know the full truth isn't a partisan issue, it's a justice issue. And 427 members of Congress recognized that, only one didn't. That single no vote from Troy Nehls is going to follow him forever. He's the guy who voted against Epstein transparency when literally everyone else voted for it. Good luck explaining that to voters. Point 6. Let's talk about what we're going to learn from the files, because that's ultimately what this is all about. We're going to see names of people who flew on Epstein's plane, who visited his island, who attended his parties, who were in his contact list. Some of those people might have innocent explanations. They knew Epstein in business or social context, but weren't involved in his crimes. Others won't have innocent explanations. They're going to be directly implicated in facilitating or participating in abuse. Come on. We're also going to learn more about how Epstein's operation worked, how he recruited victims, how he evaded consequences for so long, how he got such a lenient plea deal in Florida, who knew what and when. All of that is going to be documented in the files, and it's going to be shocking. Even people who think they know the Epstein story are probably going to be surprised by some of what comes out, because there's been so much secrecy and so many sealed documents that the full picture has never been public until now. And we're going to learn about government failures. How did federal and state authorities let Epstein operate for so long? Who dropped the ball? Were there people in law enforcement or prosecution offices who were protecting him? Were there political considerations that affected decisions about whether to charge him? The files should answer those questions too, and there should be accountability for government officials who failed to stop Epstein when they had chances. Point 7. Johnson's pivot to claiming he supports maximum transparency is not going to save him because the record is too clear. He fought this for months. He used extreme tactics. He coordinated with the White House to stop it. He called the bill flawed after it passed. You can't spin that away with a few statements about supporting transparency now. People remember, the timeline is documented, and Johnson's going to be judged by his actions, not his post hoc rationalizations. The phrase maximum transparency is particularly galling because if Johnson really supported maximum transparency, he wouldn't have tried to prevent the vote for months. He wouldn't have refused to seat a member of Congress. He wouldn't have called the bill a political exercise. He would have brought it to the floor immediately and championed it. Instead, he did everything possible to kill it. And now he's trying to take credit for transparency that he actively opposed. That's shameless. Can you believe this? So where does this leave us? The Epstein Files Transparency Act is about to become law. Files are going to be released within 30 days of Trump's signature. Powerful people are going to be named and face consequences. And Mike Johnson is going to be remembered as the speaker who tried to stop it, who fought for months to protect elite secrets instead of delivering justice for survivors, who got pushed to the brink by overwhelming public and political pressure and finally caved. That's his legacy on the Epstein issue. Not a champion of transparency, an obstacle who was overcome. The Capitol erupted over this fight. Survivors demanded justice. Members organized a discharge petition. Johnson tried every trick to prevent the vote, and he lost completely. Now the files are coming, and Johnson's speakership is weaker, and accountability is finally on the horizon. This is wild, and in 30 days, we're going to start seeing names. The secrets are about to become public, and a lot of powerful people who thought they were protected are about to find out they're not.